Hello and welcome to Cloudy with a Chance of Insights, the bi-weekly podcast all around the Microsoft Cloud. This week we are probably diving a little bit deeper or focusing a little bit more on the very recent announcement, which I think was yesterday as we're recording this, which is I don't even know what the date is, who knows, but it's Tuesday today, so it was announced yesterday. Around the expansion of the Sovereign Cloud initiative by Microsoft. And that sort of links into a few different areas of topics as well. So Dave will also talk a little bit about some Logic App pieces that sort of fit into that same bucket. From a personal perspective, I think I mentioned this on the last episode. I was actually going on annual leave. So I've actually spent 2 weeks, slightly planned and slightly unplanned, not looking at any tech news on the internet. So I've sort of come in yesterday with a completely clean slate for 2 weeks. So for a nice, pleasant surprise, I will be relatively silent during this episode, and we'll be passing the baton to Cyrus and David. But on that note, it was actually quite nice not to have to worry about keeping up to date with what's going on or work emails or anything else like that. And I think it's the first time for quite a while that I've actually had that opportunity. So if anybody else fancies it, go to a little village in Morocco. Where the internet is very ropey and you sort of get forced to have this, even if you plan to do it anyway. But anyway, never mind. On that note, I'm not sure who to pass it on to first. I'm going to pass it to Cyrus to talk about this one. So again, just to recap, Microsoft made a big announcement doubling down on their commitment around sovereign cloud, specifically for Europe, but I'm assuming this is going to be a broader piece as well. And one of those announcements, I'll pass it to Cyrus to give a little bit more detail into this, was around M365 Local, which about an hour ago made my ears prick up. And I think that we will probably have a conversation about this a little bit later on. But anyway, enough of me waffling. Over to you, Cyrus.
Thank you. Actually, we predicted this moment on a previous episode. I think it was 2 episodes ago, 4 weeks ago. We said Microsoft must deliver sovereignty to break through in Europe. And now here we are. And in today's episode, we will dive deeper into these implications. And I hope we can discuss, but there's nothing more than the article and the comments we see from Microsoft employees and different MVPs. And so interesting to know. So just to remind, it was June 16th. So for us, it's yesterday. I'm not sure when this episode will be released. And Microsoft dropped a major update. It's new sovereign cloud strategy for Europe. They're making real move because they pledge that data stays in Europe under EU law and handled by EU personnel. They even said that they have an encryption key. There's a technology they use. They give a name. I think it's in my notes. I'll find that later. Plus, they're piloting a private sovereign cloud, complete with an on-premise reference architecture for Exchange server and SharePoint server. And I want to insist on the word server here, because I thought initially it was Exchange Online and SharePoint Online, branded as Microsoft 365 local. So we will dive a bit deeper on what it means, because yesterday, David, we discussed we were discussing is Teams in the game, and it seems not for now, but dive deeper. So that's massive for regulator sector. For example, we have defense, government, finance, healthcare. There's more. So this is a big step towards compliance and cloud efficiency. So why it matters? So in a previous episode, we discussed about this example of France École Polytechnique. When they announced a move to Microsoft 365, it triggered a national uproar. People worried about data sovereignty and US legal reach. And today, Microsoft gives us a new path. It's Microsoft 365 and it's EU control. And the word I was looking for was data guardian, external key management. That's the word they used in the article. And Microsoft 365 local mean that there's real mechanism for sovereignty, and it's not just marketing fluff. So from what I see, it's a real response. Cross-reference, I've also seen that there's news about AWS releasing a sovereign cloud. I don't know if it's the same. I don't know if it's as good, but the noise was more on the Microsoft side. So what's included, what's missing? As I said earlier, there's Exchange and SharePoint for now. They included in the sovereign package. But Teams seems to not be included. And before we had, for example, Skype for Skype servers, when you can have your own server and use them to be to claim that you can be a sovereign cloud, even though that metadata floating around. But no, Teams seems to not be in the party. And that omission matters. Many organizations need model collaboration, chat, calls, recording. And without Teams, you're stuck in a hybrid limbo. On-prem mail and files, but communication lives in the Microsoft public cloud for now. And that trade-off could push some institution away from Microsoft, at least until Microsoft figures out a team sovereignty strategy. And one more comment about that. We discuss, and we'll discuss again about AI sovereignty, and AI taking over security just after, if we have time. And that's my personal concern. Is I'm happy to go to a more server, going back to the server, SharePoint server, etc., to give life back to those technologies. And I digress again, but an example for CTOs who have retired, for people I'm having conversation with, even my own dad, because he used to make fun of the cloud when he retired. He said, "Oh, in my time we had like terminal and server, mainframe and server, and that was the equivalent of a cloud. And you had a massive server and an empty shell. Now you have the super powerful workstation, and now you go back to cloud gaming, cloud everything." And he said that it's like a TikTok. It's going to come back into this era of you will need server. So everyone kind of predicted that. And my only worry is we move away so much into the advantage of having AI, powerful machines that give us Copilot, for example. You have Copilot for Microsoft 365. Will those Microsoft 365 local benefit from those advanced AI if we use Azure Local? Could be, could not be. So that's something I could not really read between the lines. Something else was actually interesting in the news. IBM is in the game, so this is when things get ever more compelling. Microsoft has tapped IBM as a privileged partner to pilot and deliver these sovereign solution, leveraging IBM's massive global footprint. So I've written a blog article about that, and there was a IBM post also about this. They have been chosen as one of the privileged partners to deliver this sovereign cloud. And maybe just a side note, I'm also having that's why I'm excited. I have a new role in IBM, UK Microsoft Practice Security Focal Lead. And there's a lot of discussion usually with clients about is Microsoft EU compliant? Is Microsoft under US Cloud Act, etc. So now we have a lot to say, and it's going to be natural. So now there's some question on industry shift, and despite the progress, there's key questions, and I've noted them down, so I'm going to read them, and we can discuss how we can they can stay in suspend. So
I think it was interesting because they pulled out Exchange Server and SharePoint Server, but they said including SharePoint Server and Exchange Server. So it's obviously not just the only ones, but perhaps they're only in a position where they can say that that's a definite, because obviously there is, existing server tooling, software, whatever you want to call it, for those products. So it makes it easy for them to port it into the Azure local piece. What I'm interested in is whether that's going to be any cut down versions, though, whether they're going to be removing functionality, or I'm assuming, and we talked about this a little bit before we came on air, that going back, 10 years ago now, 12 years ago, when SharePoint 2013 was coming out, we had dedicated options for M365, slightly different. There was certainly a relatively large client in the UK that was running M365 dedicated, and there was a whole heap of rules that they had to follow to do any work on there. I really wish I could remember the name of the framework that was there for the SharePoint development piece, but I can't remember what it was called now. But basically, it was very, very sort of restrictive. And what was happening at the time is that there was code being written that was coming back into MCS as it was at the time, for us to sort of review and mark it against that sort of framework or policy documents. Oh, no, you can't do this because you're calling X, Y, and Z SDK, which won't be there or will be, neutered in some form or other. So there was this very, very strict document that everybody had to adhere to. And then that came out, and again, we were sort of talking about this earlier on about PLAs, which is product line architecture, which is, again, like a suite of architecture guidance and controls around how you were supposed to deploy SharePoint in an on-premises world, with the goal, and I think we mentioned this a couple of episodes back, of enabling easier migration to M365 public cloud. Because obviously that was the direction of travel that Microsoft had at the time, was, hey, okay, we will support on-premise workloads because, too many people are asking us to do it, in effect. But the direction of travel is to that public cloud multi-tenancy version, and we want to make it easier for you to migrate your solutions. So you couldn't access, it was fairly common at the time, and again, bad practice. You'd access the Hive file. So people that the SharePoint developers will know what I mean. But there was like a path that you would access actually locally on the server. So you'd access that. You shouldn't have done, but people were doing it. That sort of behavior was then obviously discouraged, and you were having to use the SDKs that were published as opposed to hooking directly into the software. And I do worry or wonder what that implementation is going to be like. I would imagine for supportability purposes, it is going to be a fairly sort of on guardrails implementation of SharePoint in particular. I suspect Exchange might not be so much of a problem, but certainly SharePoint, because you don't want people just rolling around doing all sorts of weird and wonderful sort of client or server side coding to build some of the solutions that they might want to do in the private cloud scenario. We shall see, and it'll be interesting to see what else comes up. And again, my old brain was going, hey, I remember when it was called Link Server, let alone when it was Skype for Business.
Now, I'm happy you shared that, because for me, it was also just a rebranding name. So I was really pessimistic when I was reading the article, and I was checking everyone. This was not just a hype, but because they said Microsoft 365 local, I was hoping, of course, there's more. And if you look in the previous episode when we discussed the MCRA and from Mark Simos, when you have this attack path, the first thing that clients use on the first line, the first column into this attack path is always external factor, which is files and email. So that's like kind of entry point. It's just a first step in my thought. So they have probably so much in the pipeline. That's my guess, that they first said you have emails and files, and because in this French case was just two things, was just Exchange Online and SharePoint server. They didn't even try to use the on-prem. So that's promising. And for an example, for a client, there was a Ministry of Justice actually for a product they wanted to use that was in writing compliant, and they could use UK and etc. The client themselves, they find one word into the documentation that we had to dive deep for 3 months with Microsoft, which they said they had to update the documentation, and I participated in updating the documentation about some metadata that has nothing really critical floating back to the US, because that's how it works, and they could not explain on where to have this product manager of that product explaining to them to say, we will change that, but for now we need just for telemetry. We don't read, we can't decipher any client information, and they said no, we can't use it. So that's this level of details. That's why this exercise will be interesting. For my question, sorry.
Yeah.
So the question I've noted is just, will Teams be in the game? Because David made a good point about that, and that's the one. And how will the license, and I'm sure Richard, you were discussing that, how will license and pricing be structured for Microsoft 365 Local? I have no idea for now. And how easy will on-prem deployment really be? And is it managed by partners and do it yourself? As far as I read, is the partners for now will deliver something based on the 3 letters used PLA, I think, something similar. And and will government and regulator validate these sovereign cloud controls with audit certifications? Will it be part of the package? I have no idea, but it's a complete industry shift, and that's why it's an exciting news.
I think, and again, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, I think, whether it was actually on the podcast or prior to the recording, but I think that certainly with this announcement, we had also the announcement around the on-prem SharePoint sort of going away and it becoming the subscription version of SharePoint. I mean, does this mean that migrations are back on the table for some organizations? So are we going to have to dust off our migration methodologies to do on-prem to M365 local or on-prem to whatever the subscription version looks like, which I think I would put my hands up and said I actually hadn't really looked at in any level. So from a technical perspective, I'm not sure how different they really are. But is that something that we're going to have a look at? Exchange migrations. Are we going to have to think about now Exchange migrations either on-prem to M365 local or even on the cloud, if they'd actually gone there, back onto the on-premise environment, but in a local instance?
Yeah. And I think I'm going to be the pessimist today. If we're just talking about SharePoint Exchange, right, and people already have SharePoint Exchange deployed on premises, albeit keeping up to date with the various iterations of the products as they land, right? Or it's marketing, right? There's nothing new. You've got Azure Local, which we know exists. You've got Exchange Server, which we know that exists. You've got SharePoint Server that we know that exists in varying licensing flavors, right? So how much of this is a reaction to the word sovereignty versus what people are already doing? And I think trying to, if you are, although they are diminishing, aren't they? The number of people using VMware or, whatever, the hypervisor of choice, Red Hat, whatever it is, right? If you're already running on premises, Exchange and SharePoint on those, I would want to know what that absolute compelling reason is to move to Azure Local with Exchange, with some of those constraints that you already mentioned, Richard. Yeah. So, because a lot of people are already doing sovereign deployments using those workloads, right? A lot of the large system integrators, partners, they've all got, as you said, right, they've got these patterns and scripts that will help you take a thing and deploy it in a repeatable, predictable way. So I'm looking forward to being convinced, I think is how I'd position it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, Cyrus mentioned that I think he did a blog post on this. I did a blog post on this as well. So it sounds like, and again, I think it's worth pointing out that we did this without knowledge of what was coming along from a work perspective. Yeah. I was completely unaware of that sort of action from our employers. I find it fascinating that we are going on this cycle. And Cyrus referred to it, and I think, I've had conversations with a number of people about this, is that we started off with basically fat clients, for want of a better word, if that's not, politically incorrect to say now. We went to the whole thin client or the client server type model. Now we're sort of referring back to, a fatter client again, because we're sort of basically putting everything back in the salad. It just does seem like we're just running around in a big cycle that we're not entirely sure where things should be or where a lot of the data should lie, for example. Oh, it keeps us, until AI takes all our jobs away, it keeps us occupied, I suppose. Which flippant comment, I think, Cyrus, I don't know whether you actually alluded to this earlier on, but you did actually have a topic on our show, on our sort of rundown around AI and security.
Yeah. I can do it now. I can let. Okay, I'll do it. It's really fast. It's fast. So there's there's a survey that AWS has run last month. And normally I don't really read that much about AWS. It's not my cup of tea, but I was interested to see their perspective on if it was biased or not about how AI was perceived by CISO, by CTO, CEO, and even by users, if there's going to be increased, even by recruiters, etc. And so they were commissioned by AWS, and they found that generative AI has completely overtaken cybersecurity as the top tech budget priority for 2025. And in that one, I've noted about 45% of IT decision maker, and you can take a CEO, you can take Recruiter, etc., ranked Gen AI as the number one spend area, whereas 30% ranked security as the top. So this made a lot of people step back and think, according to AWS analysts. And now this doesn't mean that companies think cybersecurity is unimportant. Rather, it reflects the explosive growth of AI investment. And in fact, security was cited as the major concern within those AI projects. And we talked here about data protection, responsible AI, etc., all the purview and protection as a condition to move to an AI model. And still, it's a striking shift. Many organizations are even appointing chief AI officers and hiring AI specialists in a large number to write that. So it's what interests me about that news, and just the numbers away. We've seen plenty of trends not working. For example, we were talking about Web3, NFTs, which are real technologies, promising technologies, but the way it was exploited was like a quick trend and completely faded. AI seems to continue grow to the point that we discussed multiple times about agent and you need AI for cybersecurity, but this is not that. It's the budget, the investment, and cybersecurity was for years a lot of people who actually reconverted to IT, they were choosing cybersecurity because they said this is the future, etc. But now the numbers is the numbers, huh? Even for AWS, which is not the massive in Gen AI. It's, like you have IBM, you have Microsoft, you have NVIDIA. So even them, they recognize that AI is the number one. And but again, it doesn't. They said overtaken cybersecurity, but we need cybersecurity to have AI. But it's the perspective. So the question I had, and I threw that here. How do we balance the excitement of new AI initiatives with the steady necessity of cybersecurity? And I will leave with that question.
I'm not going to answer on purpose. I'll talk to this.
Yeah,
I'm going to let Richard go, and then I'll cover my bit in the when I
yeah, and other noises. It's such a difficult one, isn't it? Because you have to think about, from an organization's perspective, is that if you're going to invest money in something, you want it to materially impact the bottom line in effect. So you want to drive shareholder value. At the moment, that view is, let's invest in AI because that's either going to allow us to be more efficient as an organization, potentially reduce headcount, just become more efficient in whatever our day-to-day processes are, free up people to do other things as opposed to doing menial sort of admin tasks, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a clear business benefit for them to invest in Gen AI. Now, whether that investment is correct, whether it's actually going to produce those efficiencies, I personally think it's still way too early to tell. And we might just be on another hype cycle like we were with blockchain, for example. I don't know why blockchain sprang into my mind. Perhaps it's because I'm an IBMer and we had the whole blockchain is going to change the world, 8-9 years ago. But that it's sort of logical. Whereas, the perception of cybersecurity is that you only really need it when something goes wrong. It's not adding value. It might protect the value that you've got. I'm not saying, by the way, that that's what I believe, but I think that's a sort of a prevailing attitude. So again, if I've got a limited amount of investment dollars and I want to grow the business, I'm not going to invest in cybersecurity per se. I'm going to invest in something that I think will grow the business. So it's logical. Whether it's right is a different story, but it makes sense.
Another thing, this is why the Secure Futures Initiative is so important, because people need it embedded in whatever they're buying and using, right? So that, the age-old, we need to protect people from themselves. How do we ensure that it is simple enough and easy enough to apply the controls that are needed so that people can focus on just delivering the value bit, right? And the opportunity there is huge for Microsoft and the other hyperscalers, I think, to get that done, but it's not easy. It's not a quick, easy thing to do, and especially if they're talking about bringing stuff back on prem.
Yeah, because that was called out, I think, in the article. Is like that, like security then becomes the client's full responsibility.
Yeah.
And I did actually, because I think David and Cyrus both know this. I'm presenting on Wednesday in London to run an IBM event. And I found one of those shared responsibility models, but specifically for AI. Yeah. And the way that it was being broken down is that, basically, for want of a better word, on-prem entirely the customer's responsibility. But as soon as you start going anywhere in the cloud, depending on the model, and that's a key point, depending on the model and obviously how you're using it, almost all of the responsibilities seem to rest with the cloud provider. And I do wonder sometimes whether they actually is thinking, perhaps I need to push this back a little bit. Because in effect, the only thing that I'll probably get it up and I'll link to it, but off the top of my head, basically in the SaaS model, the only thing that was the client's responsibility was access. Everything else Microsoft has as their sort of responsibility.
Wow. Even the data.
And the PaaS, it basically came down to depending on the model. So again, if you're using probably an Azure OpenAI model, again, that the sort of shared responsibility layer becomes very much on the Microsoft side as opposed to on the client side. So.
Yeah, and there's an important delineation there, isn't there, Richard?
Yeah.
Responsibility for the infrastructure and that ensuring the infrastructure is secure, yes. Still the customer's responsibility to make sure the right people have the right access to data.
Again, it does seem to be that access control is the one that the Microsoft was, especially for the sort of SaaS and the PaaS service of saying, look, that is still almost 100% with the client.
Exactly.
We'll provide the tooling, Entra in Microsoft's instance, but it's down to you guys to go and do that.
Yeah.
So there's a bright future for IAM and data security. That's the two focus. That's the two ends of the pyramid of security.
Yeah.
Identity.
What did I'm still catching up on build videos. So I was literally yesterday. I was watching one with Sarah Young, who does the Azure podcast. Again, probably shouldn't be prompting or promoting other competing podcasts on here. And I'm going to paraphrase something that she said, which was that identity is now becoming the new perimeter. So it used to be the network, is now identity. And I think that's very true. And everybody should be focusing on making sure they've got some sort of robust identity solution in place. And just MFA, people. MFA, just enable MFA. Yes, I know users hate it. Just enable it for everybody.
Passkey. Sorry.
Have you noticed? Because like for a good few years, it was zero trust. It has to be zero trust. That all seems to have evaporated now. In terms of noise.
Right, I'm going to turn away from my computer for a second. So I've got the MRCA, so the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture.
I think what I'm saying is, it's no longer being pushed. It's assumed that that's the default, right? People are assuming that zero trust is everywhere. It's pervasive. Why on earth would anyone do anything else, right? And that is so far away from reality. And I worry that, you've got, as you say, the MSRA versus kind of what people are doing. And we've got a pretty healthy, chunky gap between the two in a lot of places.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess I've got a bit of a niggle of a worry that, yes, everyone understands security is important. Everyone's worried about data exfiltration at the moment because of the Gen AI stuff. What about everything else, right?
Yeah. So I will take a snip of this slide and I'll put it into the recording. But basically, right towards the end of the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture deck, and I do encourage people to have a look at this. It is a really useful resource for anybody who's even got a remote interest in cybersecurity. Some of it's quite detailed, and none of it is actually very accessible. But there is a slide there that I thought was actually very, very, very powerful. And it basically just says AI requires zero trust. and AI accelerates zero trust. So there is a symbiotic relationship between zero trust.
Yeah. And I think many would fundamentally disagree, because a lot of the real important data is going to be housed in very sensitive locations for many large businesses. I think pharma, that data isn't going to be zero trust in a million years, or some of the defense information. Right.
Yeah,
and
well, yes. And
it's that juxtaposition between the assumption and the reality, right? And I think sovereign helps some of that conversation, but the just a carte blanche saying for AI to work, you have to be zero trust. Yeah, I suppose don't trust your users, right? It's really good advice. Absolutely do not trust anyone.
Well, I mean, that in effect, that is one of the, paraphrase a bit, that is one of the principles of zero trust, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Assume breach and trust but verify, I think.
Yes.
Is the...
Thank you very much. Right.
I just want to add one small thing, and thank you, David, for saying that perception, because it's exactly that. It looks dead. Actually, it looks like completely faded, and it's as you said rightfully, it's not true. It's a perception, and I've noticed plenty of people, including myself, earlier when I was really criticizing zero trust because it was reduced to PAM technology or even as a least privilege, and we know that it's not enough. I just want to read that because I've even bookmarked into LinkedIn. So I follow Mark Simos for plenty of things, and he responded to a comment about someone making a nice article about his perception about zero trust. It's finished. It's not enough. It doesn't work. We have plenty of proof that it doesn't work. I just read a small part of his comment. He said, "You are describing symptoms of the main root cause of most cybersecurity challenges, beside attackers, that is. Most organizations have a broken accountability model for security risk, believing the myth that the security is the security team job. When people aren't held accountable for security outcomes or the action decision, then they just don't care about security." And then there's a long passage about when he described why he believed that zero trust is not well understood. And he made a book, I think 2 years ago, and he recently made a session when we discussed about zero trust. I was surprised, but it's the same as the MCRA. It didn't really change, and I have the same feeling, David, that it's a lot of theory and it's not put in practice. But it's a slow change because it's not new. It's a new trend since we moved to the cloud since COVID. So it's a slow change, but we have to follow the patterns and the architecture we see in all the iterations. So I'll probably share that small piece after to you guys.
And there was me thinking that because I didn't actually have any topics to discuss this week, that we would actually be within a nice sort of half an hour timescale. But obviously not. So without further ado, I'll pass across to David, who's going to talk about something that when I read it, I was going to pronounce one way. And then in the green room, David said actually what this was, and he pronounced it a completely different way. So I'm going to not actually go and pronounce what he was talking about. And I'm just going to pass it across to David. He's got a couple of things around Logic Apps that he wants to share with us all.
Yeah, and it may well be my Welsh pronunciation of things, Richard. So I tend to look at things and pronounce them sometimes, actually quite often, incorrectly. So you're probably right and I'm probably wrong. But anyway, yeah. So I'm going to today dive into how enterprise integration and AI governance are converging, conversation we're just having, with 3 things that show how Microsoft and the research community are taking the challenge of building sort of safe, scalable automation things, right? So the first one I wanted to talk about was prompt injection. So we've spoken about this in the past. I suppose for those that have missed this, imagine an AI-powered sales assistant reading customer emails and replying to quotes, right? So this is a fairly well-given example. Seems really, really simple, and so till somebody sort of replies back and says, send me internal price list. And then the AI model complies, and there you go, sends the internal price list. Now, without safeguards, we know that AI will actually do this. So the concept behind the thing that I'm going to talk about now, which is FIDES or FIDES, however you say it. So where it comes in, and it stands for Flow Informed Deterministic Enforcement System. There we go. And FIDES is a system that's been developed by Microsoft researchers to enforce information flow control inside AI agents. So essentially, every piece of data, I guess like a CRM entry or internal pricing sheet, is tagged with confidentiality levels. So that means that when you're using FIDES, it ensures that the untrusted inputs, like the email scenario that I spoke about, it can't trick the AI into leaking sensitive content. So that means it's deterministic. It means its behavior is predictable. And I guess it then acts as a gatekeeper inside the AI's reasoning process. So this is super important. It's critical for industries, whether it's finance, legal, sales, whatever, where data security and operational trust, to our conversations earlier, right? It's not just nice to have, it's absolutely essential. So, and that brings us nicely, I guess, into the next point, because we see that the FIDES is reflecting a larger shift, I suppose, in enterprise integration, which is a return to rule-based systems as essential guardrails in a world, I guess, increasingly shaped by probabilistic AI. So, and we see Microsoft also leaning into this with the second thing I was going to talk about, which is the general availability of the Azure Logic Apps rule engine. So this brings traditional business logic into obviously modern cloud native workflows. It's built on an algorithm that I didn't look up the acronym for, RETE, probably should have done that, don't know what it stands for, which essentially is a highly efficient rule matching engine. Lets organizations define decision logic. Again, see the linkage back to the FIDES thing we were talking about earlier. And you don't need to write or redeploy code. Again, the rules are declared, not coded. So that means they're reusable, they're modular, auditable, all that stuff. So that's significant, right, for enterprise governance. In practice, it means you can embed strict rules into these AI-driven processes to provide structure and compliance, and you can let the AI generate content, but keep the rules engine in charge of what, I guess, is and isn't allowed, in a way to anchor the AI in this something concrete and predictable. So I thought those were interesting things. That leads me into the last thing I was going to talk about, which was the availability, the general availability, I should say, of Azure Logic Apps hybrid deployment model. So we were talking about hybrid earlier, right? So this allows Logic App workflows to run on your own infrastructure, on premises, in private cloud, or even in another public cloud, like AWS, which is quite interesting, Oracle, whatever your particular flavor is. Not surprisingly, it's powered by Azure Arc, Azure Kubernetes service, and designed, again, for scenarios where you've got latency, data sovereignty, or compliance rules that demand local control. You get the same Logic Apps standard experience, but importantly, semi-connected resiliently. So it can keep running workflows during network outages for up to 24 hours. So at this point, it starts sounding like what the Azure Stack proposition used to be, right? These things could run for a certain amount of time before they have to call home. And I think to our earlier conversation around sovereignty, what is that going to look like? Is there still going to be a call home? Is there a call home? Is there a call home? What if you actually lose entire the entire networks, the connectivity, let's say Europe gets cut off from the US for whatever reason, are these things going to carry on? And those are important questions that we need to understand the answers to. But, it's a practical solution for people in like the manufacturing, finance, healthcare sectors that can't always rely on a consistent cloud connection. Also, I guess, helps making migration easier for people still running BizTalk. There are plenty of those out there. I've got a project actually that I'll be doing that for soon. So interesting, because it provides that sort of continuity and modernization without sacrificing control. So super interesting stuff. Over to you guys.
So there was two things that came up there that sort of perked my ears up a little bit. Firstly, is it does sound like it's another replacement for BizTalk, which is one of those applications that seemingly refuses to die. It's still out there doing its thing, and I think that, and this came across obviously we didn't mention it, but it obviously is part of the private cloud solution. So the M365 local is going to be Arc. So Arc is going to become increasingly important, I assume. Anyway,
thinking the same.
I'm going to have to go look in build and see whether there's any Arc announcements, but I don't remember seeing any.
There weren't masses actually.
No,
bits and bobs.
Yeah. So because if you're going to be running this distributed system across public cloud, private cloud, and on-prem, you're going to need some sort of system that's going to manage those environments. And I know that IBM have got quite a nice little backpack of tools that they can throw at that problem now. But certainly from a Microsoft native perspective, it seems like Arc is the obvious starting point for that, and it's going to be increasingly more and more prevalent, I would assume, unless Microsoft have got other plans.
And remember, it was the first episode we were discussing about Arc, and I like how David just matched the first discussion with the subject he presented, which is really interesting. And I want to read now more about this, especially the general availability of the Logic app for the on-prem. So many things I think, but it's not probably relevant to share. It's all about what you said, Richard, about Azure Arc. And but you said something, David, about air gapped if Europe is disconnected from the US. Something I also seen in the Sovereign Cloud article, Microsoft 365 Local, they mentioned, I think, once or twice air gapped. And when you say air gapped, it means that you will not have this kind of once a month license communication back to the server, and if you don't communicate back, you cut everything and you stuck. So I assume the both will be completely air gapped, as if Europe is disconnected. I just want to go online check.
Yeah, I think that's optimistic direction of travel, maybe, but because even Azure Stack as it was, it was a very limited subset of capability, right?
Yes.
When in disconnected mode.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a lot of work to do, and we'll see what comes out of it. That is going to be a topic, I think, that we are going to probably revisit on a number of occasions as information sort of drops out, and as obviously all three of us, we mentioned this every so often. We all work for IBM, and IBM is one of the sort of launch partners or approved partners for this. So I'm assuming that we will get more information as we go along about what's happening and how this will actually realistically work. But yeah, it's something that I'll be honest with you, I'm shocked at the speed that this has happened. I know I put a blog post out there talking about it, but that sort of news cycle from Microsoft around this is interesting, especially when when was Azure Stack launched, the first version of Azure Stack? What 12 years ago, 13 years ago?
Something like that, isn't it?
2015, no?
So it was when I was at Microsoft, which is about that time period. And then that sort of, it was a launch with a big fanfare. There's at least one largest UK bank running on Stack, or at least was 5 years ago. Whether it still is or not, I don't know. But it never really took off. And then you saw that there's a slight shift in mindset to things like the the stack HCI and the edge and etc. And then it sort of went quiet. Is that fair to say? And then suddenly it's like, oh,
Yeah.
local this, local that, all sort of based around that same principle.
Yeah.
So yeah, the speed of change on that is interesting. I would, Microsoft is saying that some of it's about data regulations and making it easy to comply to that. I suspect there's an AI element in this as well, but I do wonder whether there's something else that is prompting that shift in strategy.
Well, AWS recently did a certified, what is it? Something similar, some sort of sovereign secure certification. So you'd have certain partners that were certified to deliver these secure sovereign capabilities. Microsoft has had the sovereign cloud GitHub repo. They've got a bunch of assets that do the same thing, but it was never a certification process. I go prove you can do it, come back to show us, and then we'll give you a thumbs up to say that you can do it, which is what AWS did. So part of me thinks it may be a bit of a reaction to that, so that somebody can say, look, I'm certified to deliver you in a secure, local, sovereign sort of manner, even if it's in the public cloud, right? But you're right, we need we're hypothesizing. It'd be we need more data, don't we?
What could be interesting?
Well, I'm sure that is going to be something that's going to be fairly regularly sort of updated on, because they have made a big splash about this in two fairly lengthy and well publicized blog posts recently. So I'm assuming that there's going to be more news to follow on that one.
Yeah.
And for once, I don't think I have any tangents to go off on at the end of this. So I don't know whether anybody else has any final thoughts to share with the audience.
Quickly, it's just all these governments in Europe on all this regulated industry. I want to see how many of them, because we discussed earlier with David about they're already using SharePoint server or Exchange server, but some of them they don't. And I wish to know is it to target them? Is it enough, the number of clients that are not using Microsoft in the government to justify this shift? Is it, as David rightfully said, I believe the same, like AWS proposing something that Microsoft don't? Or is it like a fine they could receive, or they know that they're going to be received? So I'm really keen to know, as a value, what they can get from this non-Microsoft house that can join the club, or if it's something something else.
So I hate to say this, right, but most of this is being driven by political headwind ultimately, and I'm sure you both have seen it's not Denmark, was it Denmark? Somebody in Europe have basically said, we're cutting all ties with Microsoft, we're going Linux.
Yes. I don't remember which one.
Good luck. No. Good luck. But
yes, it was one of the Scandinavian countries.
It wasn't it? Yeah. But the problem is, it's noisy, it's visible. You've got everything that's happening in the US at the moment. You've got everything geopolitically that's happening as well. All that uncertainty, I think, is driving people to really think hard about what it means for sovereignty. And if they don't react, as we said back or the first episodes of this, if there's not some sort of reaction, then they will just get left behind in some way, shape, or form. Because as big as they are, you can still fall, right? So
yeah. Excellent. On which happy note. Oh, and there you go. There's me not being a very good YouTuber or Spotify or whatever you want to call it. But if you're still with us after that, please do drop a like, a subscribe, a comment, a follow, whatever it might well be on the platform of choice, and join us again for more of the same in. Well, I'm not sure when yet, because we are late on this episode, as I think everybody would have noticed. We should have been released yesterday, and so we are late primarily because of my annual leave. So I'm not sure when we're going to be publishing it yet, but it looks like it's going to be Monday, the whatever it is. So follow us then, and we will wish you all a good rest of the day and week. So thank you from me.
Have a good day.